So, welcome once again, folks, to the Astrology of Family Karma and Relationships podcast. I'm your host, Alexander Malin. And today we have again our special guest astrologer, a special guest host, Astrologer Tim Nielsen. So, thank you, Tim, for joining us. It's really great to have you again.
Thank you, Alexander.
Tim was a magnificent astrologer, as you'll come to again experience. A brilliant, brilliant writer. I'm going to put up I'm going to put up your website here in a moment for people to come check out your writings. And you're a very prolific writer, deep writer, thoughtful writer, and you'll see Tim's got a lot going, and including we were just chatting as we were getting the program going here. That you also studied under Noel Till, who was one of the great luminaries of Western astrology.
Mm, agreed. Um, had the good fortune to study with Noel, to get to know him and to appreciate not only his approach in astrology, but how he embraced other domains to enrich his astrology. Um, um,
Well, we're going to do some programs, hopefully, and some of these greats, and Noel will be one, obviously, for you to kind of help introduce more people to Noel's incredible work.
yeah.
So, a little business first as we get rolling here. So today, Tim, our topic will the topic that you brought to us to explore, and this is your slideshow about to be shown in a moment, entitled Torero, the astrology of a bullfighter, a radial exploration of that topic of this phenomenal bullfighter, Manolete. So before that, just get to a little bit of business, folks. This podcast is still pretty new, just a few months old, half a year thereabouts. And of course, for search engines to find the podcast, so other people can tag on, we need to have your subscriptions. So if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. We'd love to have you follow our podcast on Apple and Spotify, YouTube channel, and subscribe, please. Those subscriptions do count. They get those computers to find that I'm out there, so people can find our program. So you gotta appease those algorithms, Tim. It's a key thing.
Mhm.
And here
Well
is
said.
Tim's contact. Both my website here, www.astrologyspirit.com, and Timothy's www.hudsonvalleyastrologer.com. Think of the Hudson Valley, New York, the home of Woodstock and more. Pretty popular place these days. It's kind of like, I think, Tim, the new Haight-Ashbury, maybe one could, if I can be so poetic to say, is the Hudson Valley. These years, Hudson Valley, New York. So Tim, www.hudsonvalleyastrologer.com.
Did you share that slide?
The slides up here, not for you to see. If I share, it's going to mess up the recording, but I've got it for the
Gotcha.
audience to see, and I'm going to pass the torch to you and your slideshow, please. So we're going to talk about the chart of Manolete, this great bullfighter, and maybe also bullfighter John Fulton. We'll come to that, but the show is yours, so you can do a screen share there on your end, Tim, whenever you're
Perfect.
ready.
Perfect. Let's go here.
It's coming up. There you go. And I'm not sure, Tim, if you have a way of. Oh, there you go. Excellent. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
So I'm not a Zoom aficionado, so
Yeah.
if
Nor
I
am I.
stumble around, we can just pause and regroup. Uh, the topic for this podcast came up, Alexander, because I received your text while I was in a funeral home attending a wake for a family member.
Mm.
And not this past January, but just the January before, I experienced a death in the family. I'm one of nine. We're all getting older, but the baby of the family, who was 57 when she passed, uh,
Mm.
died suddenly from an aneurysm in January. And in between her death and my mother-in-law's death, who died this most recent January, just last month. Um, I've probably lost 4 or 5 clients who've passed. So there's a lot of eighth house stuff going on. Maybe I should check my perfections, which is not an eighth house perfection, by the way. But I just thought I'd throw that little astrological humor out your way. Um, and when you sent me the text, I thought, well, why don't we do something on death? And I just happened to remember or recalling the story that James Hillman shared in his book, The Soul's Code, about this bullfighter, Manolete. And he sourced most of the information from a book that was written in 1958. I think it was recently republished. So there's a more updated version. The Death of Manolete from 1958, I presume, was the book that um, Hillman referenced because Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, was written around 93, 94,
And you
which
might want to just define Hillman, James Hillman, you're referring to.
James Hillman, famous psychologist, he's the um, kind of philosophical in nature. People who like him refer to him as the psychologist's psychologist.
Mhm.
Um, and I just thought it was interesting that Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, came out with that epic Uranus Neptune conjunction in Capricorn in 93. And also, so did the 10,000 Maniacs album that had a song, Manolete, on it that year. What was the name of that album? Do you recall? Were you a fan?
I'm a fan of 10,000 Maniacs, and who's the? I think she's a Hudson Valley
Natalie Merchant.
Natalie Merchant also, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
Merchant rather. She's a Hudson Valley resident, I believe, right?
The band was from the Buffalo area, but she did end up in the Hudson Valley. Um, but let me see if I can find the name of that because it was
But yeah, I think that well, as you're looking, uh, I did since you brought this whole topic to review. Yeah, the song that you're referring to that Natalie Merchant and 10,000 Maniacs recorded is a pretty well-known song. It's kind of a ballad to the this famous Spanish bullfighter Manolete and his life, his legacy, and maybe even his terminus of life, his end of life, which came. Well, you'll explain for us in a moment, right? Came in a interesting and powerful way.
I'm going to skip the song reference. Well, it is Manolete, and I can't remember the actual name of
The album.
the album. But the interesting part was that was that brought out when the Soul's Code was published under this epic conjunction of Uranus and Neptune. Just kind of an interesting um, coincidence or correspondence, I should say. Um, on the first couple of slides, I'm going to buzz through them they're just kind of space holders to get to the charts. And we'll discuss Menelete, who he was, and we'll look at the charts and we'll dive into it. Um, we're not going to go too much into the astrology of bullfighting or the astrology and bullfighting, but make references to it because I think maybe we'll come back. We're not going to sit here for 2 hours and talk about all the
Yeah, so we're looking. You and I are sort of kicking around here, folks. That Tim and I might do a couple of programs because this is some juicy stuff. The theme of these incredible gentlemen. Perhaps we'll touch on John Fulton today, since we were talking about that in preparation. Bullfighter John Fulton today, February 20th. Today, February 20th, 2025. This is the 27th anniversary of Bullfighter John Fulton's death. So
Hmm.
there are a couple of powerful things that, and that was completely right, Tim. That was totally just out of the blue. We didn't know
Yes.
that this today that we're doing the show. That this is actually John Fulton's, date of his death. In fact, you thought it was the 8th that when he really had his heart attack. But so this
Right.
is kind of this interesting. I think Carl Jung would be proud of us. We're having a
Yeah, yeah.
synchronicity happening here, folks. Live before your eyes on tape, as they say of people live on tape.
Yeah. I mean, and part of Menolete's legacy uh, is, you know, um, bullfighters like Fulton coming in his wake, who, really admired Manolete. He was brilliant in his craft and his art. It was an art form for him. So we'll touch on those things. Manolete was born in 1917 on July 4. So we'll take a look at the chart in a minute. But from Cordoba, Spain. And we're going to see some interesting contradictions, I think might be the right term to use, because when you look at the chart, the question that we have in front of us is, how was the person who ultimately ended up being impaled by the horn of a bull?
Hmm.
What was the famous bull's name? You
The
wrote it
bull,
down?
the famous bull was Elero,
Hilera.
Islero, Elero,
Hilera. Um, Being impaled by Hilera, I think the
and
right
it was a
horn.
equally famous bull, right? You're saying
Yeah, it.
Manolete, and it should be two T's by the way. Manolete was, I mean, he is the most famous fighter in Spain ever. Yeah,
Hmm.
is that
Well,
the case?
I
Or
don't know that he was
one
the
of
most
them,
famous. He was certainly the most popular,
the most
and
popular.
and his funeral drew more attendees than any funeral
Hmm.
in history. So,
Wow.
I've been to a number of funerals in the last year,
Yeah.
but nowhere near the record-setting number of people attended, that attended Menolete showed up for any of my family members, and my sister had quite a few
Hmm.
people wrapped around that funeral home,
Hmm.
multiple times. Menolete was a legend. He was a hero. And I think when you see the end of his life, which was only at age 30, different from Fulton, right?
Hmm.
So he's right smack dab on the Saturn return, as your listeners know. Does this planet Saturn comes around approximately every 30 years, depending on retrogrades and where it is in your birth chart. 27 years old to 30
28 and a
years
half
old.
to 31 is a Saturn return, right? Saturn orbits the sun every roughly 30 years is close
Roughly
enough
30
for,
is a
yeah,
good benchmark. And so
right.
that a Saturn return doesn't get any more intense than being impaled by a famous bull. I think that when you look at the life story of Menolete and you look at it as Hillman is suggesting, backwards, there is this strong suggestion that he met his destiny.
Hmm.
The way, when, and where he was supposed to leave this earth, and that it was in him. Hillman uses the metaphor of an acorn. We're astrologers. We have the benefit of the circle representing the acorn, if you like, but we can look inside. Whereas, Hillman didn't have that luxury. He just waxed and waned poetically and speaks about using imagination to connect these dots, which, in some respects you're doing it, after the evidence is, the horse is out of the barn, but there is a powerful construct here that suggests the boy who was very shy and hid behind his mother's skirt apron would later become a hero in Spain. And so he alludes to the young Manolete imagining that his mother's apron was his cape, right? So,
Wow,
so
his
but
bullfighter's red cape. Wow. Hmm.
so
Interesting.
it's his um poetic way of suggesting that, to whatever degree we are steered by the fates versus our will,
Hmm.
modern psychology likes us to think and embrace the idea that, that's up to us to decide. And Hillman, I think, is challenging that precept in a pretty convincing manner. And I think in a way that your listeners would appreciate, Alexander, especially when you tie it to, concepts like karma and those sorts of ideas. So,
Well, indeed, too, because anyone who knows my work, my clients, certainly students that I've had over the decades, and even any listeners or followers in the last few months that this podcast has existed, the Astrology of Family Karma is my podcast title, if you will, the umbrella. The idea that a birth chart, this is a very Western concept too, particularly more than Vedic astrology, that we are co-creating our world, that our birth chart is a descriptor of kind of the acorn of the self, but that consciousness and our mindful awareness has some governance, not only, let's say, genetics or the acorn fate, or say spiritual fate, maybe karma perhaps, but this Western idea that we are concurrent, and co-creative. It's a very Western astrological concept. Maybe even in contrast, even though spirituality, karma, the idea of the Vedantic scripture going back 5 to 10,000 years, that clearly is spiritual. The application of astrology for a Western mind is, I'm driving the car. I'm in charge of myself, right? So you're saying that Hillman is kind of challenging that sort of ego or sun, we really astrologically sun-driven chart.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well put.
Mm.
Um,
So this slide about Manolete's
yeah, we'll see. This is just not even this, barely a sketch. We'll see on the chart when we get to it, major points in the life, and we can go through and delineate more. But especially for Manolete, you'll see that the IC is a very powerful
mm,
point in his chart for some reason. The past sometimes, new beginnings in other times. Um, so we'll touch on, the measurements that came to mind when I was, going through his acorn, which I love that you used the word spirit. I was thinking soul. I think that's where Hillman goes. He calls it the soul's code. It's his metaphor of an imprinting. The soul imprints on the personality to some degree, which I can get
definitely,
completely behind that. Um,
as I am, yeah.
my embrace of karma is a little different. I feel like it's a dated concept. and really needs to be updated. Um, and especially in terms of like, bad karma versus good karma, that kind of stuff, and debts and things. I'm not entirely on board with that sort of thing. But I get how that works for people, and that can sometimes help them understand issues that they've not been able to unravel any other way. And so that kind of perspective can
Well,
be helpful.
there is certainly in Manolete's chart, there's a powerful sun south node. Astrologers in the West and East both look at the nodes of the moon being karmic points. So we'll be tackling that, I think, a little bit. And perhaps if it's okay, Tim, for the sake of the listeners who are not watching us on YouTube, may I read the gist of this slide that talks
Oh,
about
sure, sure.
Manolete, his early life
I
and
forgot
background?
that some people might be on the radio. Yeah.
Listen, and yeah. So here we have a slide, folks, that says Manolete, the bullfighter, and his early life and background. His birth and early years. Manolete was born in 1917 in Cordoba, Spain, in a
Yes.
family deeply embedded in the bullfighting tradition.
Meaning that his father was a bullfighter.
Well, so he's a lineage of bullfighters, but
Right.
probably somewhat famous bullfighters, people
Mhm.
who had chops, people who were acknowledged as being gifted. And as you say, in Spain, there's a certain degree of fame like cultural. I mean, Spanish cultural bullfighting, cultural
I
hub.
mean,
They're
not to go too far with the metaphor, but I mean, in our country, the
mm.
closest you would get to a famous bullfighter would be, Michael Jordan.
Okay,
Played
that's a great thank you. I was looking for the
different
right.
bull.
Different bull, or maybe a football quarterback. So okay, so the slide continues, folks. It says family influence. Growing up in a bullfighting family, Manolete was inspired by the culture and traditions of bullfighting from a very young age. His training in bullfighting happened in his formative years, which were spent training and learning the art of bullfighting, which defined his future career. So I don't know if you want to kick another slide in there for us.
Well, Chicago Bulls. Yeah.
Chicago Bull.
So yeah,
There you
basketball
go.
reference.
The
There was the
Americanized.
he is the Michael Jordan of Spain, or he was the Michael Jordan of Spain. And our basketball hero in this country, which has changed and many times over since, played for the Bulls. So kind of funny. Um, his legacy, I think, is about how he changed the old styles and renewed the ideals of bullfighting, corrida. I don't know if I pronounced that right? But and yet he was a
Karaida. Yeah, but I'm not sure. Kurida, probably Kurida.
he
Yeah.
was a timid and fearful boy. So that's the point that I'm fascinated by is how this little boy who hid behind the skirt apron of his mother, afraid, so much so that friends and family made fun of him. The last thing he wanted to do was play Torara uh, when he only wanted to paint and read.
So I'm kind of leaping ahead when we go to show when we get to the chart. The fellow students of astrology, will be surprised that this super famous bullfighter, this courageous man who hid behind his mom's skirt, was a Cancerian.
Yeah.
He wasn't a Taurian or an Aries personality that many of us might think with a bullfighter. He was a Cancerian.
And here you can see the chart
Yes.
now. Okay. So jumping into the chart and the way that I break down the horoscope is first into quadrants and I do a fair amount of work on sun moon blends and I actually didn't even look up. Oh, I kind of know that. The Cancer Jupiter combination. So I don't even have to look that up. But
The Cancer Sun,
first,
the Jupiter.
first, what I would look at is the emphasis that's below the horizon. The traditional astrologers would call it a night chart. I just look at whether the chart leans to the east, leans to the west, leans to the south, which is above the horizon, or leans to the north, which is below the horizon, down towards the fourth house. And this chart has a distinct impression. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll draw a big arc around that just to kind of make that emphasis to help draw the eye of the client there. And it suggests to me a fair amount of suppression in the individual, undoubtedly related to unfinished business in the early home life, which we know there was plenty of reason for Manolete to have, become reticent and withdrawn. And to back away and into a self-protected mode. And that's indeed what he did and what the descriptions Conrad provides in his detailed description of the personality as a child, which is so rich for us as astrologers to learn from. And that beginning it, it is somehow overcome where this man, as he comes of age, becomes a national hero,
Hmm.
which is truly a remarkable transformation.
Which I wonder, by coincidence, sometimes there are these coincidences, or sometimes maybe it's typical with astrology, right? The Manoleta's a day, month, and year again, July 4th of 1917, and for us Americans, that day of July 4th is a kind of a notable, noteworthy date. Of course, I don't think there's any correlation whatsoever between Manoleta's life and the United States, but probably kind of a 19th, 20th century 19th, 20th century bullfighter that we in the States might have been aware of him because he was such a superhero, right?
Mhm.
He might have
Oh,
been
interesting.
one of the first that the United States would have, the media. I mean, you're talking about, let's say, television, so he was one of the very first bullfighters to be broadcast, So yeah, I'm just
Well,
thinking
and we'll
his
see, and
birthday,
I don't
July
know
4th.
this, but we'll see if in some way he was a draw for Fulton.
For the bullfighter Fulton, if
Yeah,
he influenced
to
Fulton, yeah, Fulton, who was born in
in addition to
Philadelphia.
the things you discovered about Fulton, and by way of Mexico getting to you know
We'll talk about
into
Fulton.
the sport, which really from their view is an art, which is interesting to think about because it's involving death. And when we look at Menolete's chart with a very intense Mercury and Pluto conjunct, Pluto ruling the eighth house of transformation, there is an inkling there that he's going to take a stand. He's going to have an incisive, keen awareness of his environment, and he's going to test his opinions until he transforms his mindset somehow to come out from underneath his mother's skirt apron, which is, we know in a way we're cheating because we're looking backwards via Hillman's approach, but we know in fact he does that, and he overcomes the inhibitions. I think that I are sometimes Cancerian to a fault. Not always. I mean, we can see that Cancer um, public exhibition sometimes come out, but in this case, eventually it does. But in this case, in the beginning, he was in his shell.
It has me thinking. Well, there are two things I'd like to say here for the listener and do for the viewer. I think I can do this, although I don't. Unfortunately, our Tim and I, as Tim said, we're both challenged. Listen, we're both boomers, I guess, at this point. So it's hitting us like we're not 20 anymore, and so technology is not our. It does not. It doesn't roll off our fingertips here. So patience, folks. But I just want to quickly see if I can reduce this screen
Want
and
me
and
to
and and show
flip
and
back?
show and show no show which I'm doing successfully here, thank you God.
Oh,
So here through a different, this is the astrology program that a lot of pros use, Solar Fire. So in my Solar Fire program that's up on the screen, half screen, you and I are there, and we see that Pluto at the bottom of the chart for Manolete. We see Mercury at 1 degree of Cancer, conjunct 4 degree Pluto, conjunct the nadir at 10 degrees, conjunct a 10 degree South Node in Cancer, conjunct an 11 degree Sun in Cancer. There's a whole big stellium for Mercury through Sun and Venus in Cancer at 29 Venus to Saturn at 1 and Neptune at 3, Leo, a whole big grouping. But as you said, Tim, the bottom of Manolete's chart is very powerfully just full with planets. And we have to look at this chart with the moon approaching the north node at the top of the sky. In other words, that night, Manolete was born near midnight. And if we took someone out for a proverbial cigar, if we were there at Manolete's birth, we'd go out and we would see this beautiful full moon, a nearly full moon. He was a full moon baby and born during a lunar eclipse. Manolete was born during an eclipse. So I don't want to steal your thunder. I'm sure it's something you were percolating right when you came to me with this chart, but
hmm.
it's a powerful visual here. So going back to your slideshow, that shows a couple of key things you've circled. You circled
Nice.
Manolete's sun at the bottom. You circled that Uranus,
I
and you're,
mean,
you're highlighting the Mercury
I
Pluto.
wasn't, the thought didn't come to me. I would have gotten to the eclipse, I suppose, in a consultation. But what I was doing here, because I just put this together quickly for our chat, I wanted
Sure.
to just highlight uh, major events in the life and how they corresponded to the chart and how they tend to echo from that seed, from the acorn, per Hillman's, the resident with the soul, perhaps. Um, the sun is tightly conjunct the nodal axis, which I think it is interesting to think about this in terms of karma. I think of it more in terms of the mother, the nodal axis relating to the moon, and the nodal axis very often indicating um, relationships, period, but also significantly relationships with mother early on. And the mother really became quite important to Menelete
Hmm.
because the father died here at age 5. If you just
Wow.
move Mercury,
Mercury to the sun.
I apologize. No, that's not.
You're saying Mercury to Pluto, I think is what you're thinking about. Yeah, initially? Because you said age
mm,
5. His father died at age 5.
no, yeah, father. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Transiting Pluto
Oh, thank you. Okay.
came across the IC, right at the node.
And
Matter of
right,
fact,
conjunct Manolete Sun node conjunction. Your
boom.
your your chart doesn't show the south node. This chart over here, I have the south node right within a degree, half degree of that sun. So there was a south node sun conjunction in Manolete's chart that's very significant. As you said,
Right.
it
So
rose.
I'm a minimalist, and to me, the south node, north node, if I know where the north node is, I know where the south node is. So that's why it's not there.
Right.
But I was jumping ahead to this is a solar arc that I drew here. The father's death was transiting Pluto, and there's other measurements, I'm sure, but I just thought it was interesting because this section of his chart just keeps ringing through his life in some of the most important pivotal events in his life, namely one, the death of the father, and two, the introduction and being seen by a mentor. That at age 11, that's what that arc is, from one Cancer to 11 Cancer is 11 degrees. Thanks.
So you were saying one Cancer, the Mercury.
You can edit that.
Yeah, that's we're human. Things happen. So we didn't get that. We just saw you stand up to take care of something. So you were saying that the Mercury at one Cancer or something or other. I'm trying to follow where you're.
So this is a solar arc, his age 11,
Oh,
and I have it marked right here. Solar arc Mercury equals sun. That means that we're advancing Mercury to the sun precisely at his age 11, coincident with transiting Jupiter coming to the ascendant. And so I just thought it was
well, hold
interesting.
on, hold on. I'm confused though. What happened at age 11 for
Age 11,
Manolete?
he met his mentor,
That was the piece I don't think I understood. Okay.
Jose. Um,
Which by the way, Mercury learning, teaching, coming to solar arc to his sun. Solar arc takes a planet, and essentially, if we take an arc of age, so I always tell my clients if you're age 10, you add 10 degrees to every planet in your chart. If you're age
right.
20, you add 20 degrees to every planet in your chart. That's a quick and dirty way to do solar arcs.
Yeah, quick
So
and dirty.
ergo, in Manuletta's chart with a Mercury at 1 degree and the sun at 11, that at age 11 that Mercury comes to his sun. Mercury, mercurial teaching, and son, father figure. Now, you had said that his dad died at age 5, but here, that Mercury to Sun conjunction brings another father figure to his life.
Yes, yes. Um, and the sun is a little bit slower in the summer, so 57 uh, and
Arcman of the year,
change
right?
at 59 and
Right.
57 or whatever, and so you're going to have a slower accumulation of the seconds and the minutes, and so that's why there's a little dissipation, and that would grow over time. So the arcs would be, so you can see that 1 to 11 is 10 degrees, but it takes 11 years to cover that space,
Gotcha. Yeah.
because
So,
because
in
it's a
essence,
summer birth.
the Mercury arcs to the Sun,
Yeah.
adding roughly 10, 11 degrees. Boom, the Mercury hits the Sun right when his mentor came into his life, which is
And there's something powerful, and this isn't demonstrating it entirely, but there's something powerful um, in nesting the solar arcs in a way when they're coincident in time with other transits and
oh,
progressions.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's really the reason that I thought this was a useful chart, because we could show that. We can show, one, the IC is getting hit at age 5 by transiting Pluto. Two, the IC is getting hit by solar arc Mercury, coincident with transiting Jupiter to the ascendant. It's a very nice, clean, simple way
The,
to communicate that concept.
there is something else, interestingly. I'm gonna for the viewers, I'm gonna see something. Unfortunately, Tim, I can't show you
Oh, that's fine.
technologically, but since that Mercury is 1 degree and Pluto's 4 degrees, they're 3 degrees separate. So it would imply at age 3 there is something involving Pluto, Plutonian themes, death or resurrection, or death and dying, or family concerns. We don't have the facts yet. We got to do a little more research. Perhaps somebody in his family when he was 3 might have, or 2 or 3 might have had something happen for him. But it does bring up those early years as Mercury by solar arc progression, 1 degree per year of life. Here it says at age 3 or maybe 4, you got to give an orb. Astrologers talk about giving an orb of a degree either side of an event astrologically, because astrology, I always say, Tim, since I'm a backyard astronomer, astrology is not a perfect science. Astrologers want to make it so, but I don't think it will ever be a perfect mathematical. That Mercury hits
Well,
that Pluto, it should be age 3,
to that
it could be
note,
age 4.
on that note, flip it back and let's look at the chart again.
I'm back with you. I'm back on your on your
Because, in
your
fact, Saturn does arc to Neptune at age 2.
yes.
Manolete almost died of pneumonia.
And
I
Mercury, by the
could
way,
I
governs the
could imagine that there were
Mercury rules breathing.
say again.
Mercury rules breathing. So his solar arc Mercury goes to his Pluto. He almost dies of a lung issue of pneumonia.
Well, the way I was reading that is that for sure, but
Right.
here Neptune rules the 12th cusp. Pisces is ruled by Neptune. So
Right
Neptune
on.
rules the 12th cusp. Saturn, which can also represent death and the Grim Reaper, comes to Neptune, and this is critical illness. This is critical illness, but the opposite end of the 12th house or the 12th house cusp is the 6th house cusp, ruled by Mercury. Mercury coming to Pluto suggests that this is the rehabilitation phase and him dealing with this condition, this the lung condition probably would stay with him for some time
Right.
in
Saturn is chronic. It
chronic.
takes a long time. So, we're saying Mercury rules his sixth house of health, acquired
Mm,
health concerns. Mercury by solar arc direction comes to his Pluto. Pluto can be death and dying, and Pluto also governs viruses, by the way. So Pluto
mm.
governs viruses. So Mercury comes to Pluto when he has pneumonia. Saturn comes by solar arc direction to his Neptune when he contracts pneumonia. Neptune governs bacterium and similar, and Pluto governs viruses. They can flip sometimes, but either way, there's two major solar arc directions here that happen at age 2 to 3 in his chart that
Right.
could discuss serious health conditions. And you're right. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, the critical part is typically a 12th house indication. And we will see that in Fulton's chart when he had his heart attack. His 12th house is ruled by Leo. And his son came under significant pressure. So that kind of lines up. But I might be eating my words because I think I might have had the wrong date. So we'll go back. The wrong year. I had the wrong year plugged in. So I'm gonna have to, buy that back if but oftentimes, the Leo rulership of the 12th house cusp does point to that area of health as being more critical than say Aquarius, which would be on the sixth house cusp in that instance, and problems with your ankles, or
Well, so you're pointing out that in Manolete chart, the Pisces is on the cusp of the 12th. Neptune rules therefore the 12th, and so when that Saturn by solar arc comes to his Neptune, it could trigger a real severe health crises, which almost indeed did take his life. This is powerful astrology. When people don't know that these techniques can be so exacting. Something as simple as a solar arc, that Saturn at 1 degree, the Neptune at 3, 2 degree difference between. So it says age 2, there could be a life-threatening disease. Saturn to the Neptune and the Mercury to the Pluto both. And by the way, I wanted to jump in here too and say that before Pluto was discovered in 1930, Saturn was the bringer of death. In other words, Saturn's orbit every 30 years. You have a first Saturn return age 30, second
Good
Saturn
to
return age
remember.
60, third and final Saturn return for most of us age 90. But Pluto, when we discovered Pluto, suddenly you've got the god of the underworld. Uh, so Pluto has a pertinent issue, a pertinent connection to death. And as you said when you opened the show, Manolete has his south node sun conjunct the Pluto and conjunct the Mercury. So Pluto is with that south node in the sun. There's a Pluto theme, and one Pluto theme. His dad dies at age 5 when Manolete was age 5. It's a big Pluto theme about death. This man, this famous bullfighter, whose entire career is about being a sort of what was it? Who was the one that was taking us across the river Styx? I forget the mythic god, but he's sort of he's a Pluto figure certainly, right?
Mm. Yeah, and Promethean too. That
Rising from from his hell, the hell.
well, that Uranus is not really aspecting any planets. When I go through the chart, his sun is unaspected, and Uranus is unaspected. And I tighten up the orbs purposefully to illuminate those instances where the planets are unaspected to give me a little bit more information. And so in this um, diagram, I'm looking at the iconoclastic um, rebel who also is dissociated from uh, from people. And so it's his way of connecting became with the crowds at the arena. And the other how do I go back? Let's see. There. We can't miss this. This is the Quindachili. And so his mind is on fire and it's
And
piping in.
pointing for the listener. You're pointing at his Mars in Gemini in
Mm,
the second house, aspecting his moon, and you gave a specific hint here, or more than a hint, at an aspect. And what can you fill us in about that, Tim?
the Quindachili is a favorite aspect Noel liked to use. He talks about discovering it, but he really rediscovered
And
it.
can you tell us
Uh,
what's the aspect degree, please?
he rediscovered it in the libraries of Germany, and the aspect degree is just 15 degrees shy of a opposition. So it's a 165-degree aspect. So we're looking at Mars at 13 Gemini and from directly across from that point is 13 degrees um, Sagittarius. And so if you add 15 degrees, that brings you to about 28 degrees um, uh, Sagittarius. His moon's at 29. So that's within the orb. That's within the orb of the Quindachili. And it's very powerful because remember, he's got all these planets lined up in Cancer. So um, can Cancer's ruled by the moon and is dispositing all of these planets, leading them in a way, or how would you, Alexander, describe what disposit means?
So my understanding of dispositorship is when a planet is occupying a sign, which it has to, a sign of the zodiac, and that sign of the zodiac will be ruled or governed by a ruling planet. Ergo, the sign of Cancer, that is, let's say July. So the sign of Cancer, aka the sun's moving in front of the stars of Cancer in July. And what is July? above the equator, July is when animals give, birth. The ancients used the crab, the animal, the totem for Cancer, the crab, as the totem animal for this sign. Not because the star pattern looks at all like a crab, but because it's the season of the crab. July is the month when a crab will give birth to 500,000 young, 500,000 live young. So the ancients said, what animal totem would talk about summertime birthing? Oh, crabs, perfect. You know, and so the animal totem, the crab, giving birth, fecundity, family and fecundity. That's Cancerian, and they
Mm.
say that, of course, the planet that the ancients gave to govern or rule Cancer is the moon. And why the moon? Because of women's moon cycles. It is a 29 and a half day orbit for the moon. And since astrology is all about astronomical cycle, astrology is astronomy, right? It's the human experience of these cycles. And so the moon cycle rules uterus, it rules birthing, right? So Cancer is about birthing and family, and he has that Cancer at the bottom of his chart, the nest, the home of the chart. And you were saying he was very attached to mommy.
Very
So
attached.
so the dispositorship is that Cancer planet's here, his sun, namely, is ruled by the moon, and the moon's placement, therefore, be really important. And his moon is on the cusp of entering the opposing sign of Cancer, Capricorn, the
Yes.
wintertime sign of Capricorn. His moon is in the wintertime sign of Sag. The moon is at that zero, almost 0 point. The moon is almost at the point of the winter solstice, 0 degrees Capricorn, late Sag. And you're saying the aspect which Tim, totally got me on this one. I never studied Till's stuff about quindicili. I know you've told me and been teaching me for a while, and I'm still kind of, I'm still working it to absorb the quindicili. And I was going to
Mm.
ask you, can you help me in the audience understand this in Manolete's chart that
Well, I
Mars
mean,
in
it's
Gemini is
tying into the
quindicili the
moon.
moon.
It's tying into the moon. You did a beautiful overview of the seasonal connections, and symbolically with the moon ruling the sun. And I love that, 500 births at a time, the fecundity aspect. But there's also the aspect of, working to come out of one's shell, and
Ah,
and
great,
feeling
cool.
feeling the necessity of self-protection. All these things that people who don't study astrology describe Menelete as actually exhibiting, and his inhibition and all of those things as a young boy. And yet he's got this very adventurous, wanting to go out. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the Aries point. And you just referenced it. It's the zero cardinal sign. And it's not just the Aries, 0 degrees Aries, it's 0 degree any cardinal sign, which in effect Manolete had, but because it's still there in Sagittarius, there's a Jupiterian draw and pull, and it's in its natural house.
Jupiter
And
ruling
so
Sag,
the, the
Jupiter ruling his moon. So you'd say the dispositorship of the moon is the planet
yes,
Jupiter. Jupiter
yes.
disposes of his moon.
So it's
His
complicated.
moon, well, and more important, his moon is in the outer part of the chart.
Yes,
Like astronomically, what's the highest, most elevated planet in Menolete's chart? The
yes,
moon.
yeah.
What's the most elevated planet in the chart is what the public sees of us.
Mm,
And Manolete's chart has the moon most elevated and the north node of the moon, the part of Dharma, I call it. In the West, we call it Dharma, and in Vedic, they call it karma. But there is a karmic fatalistic piece of that moon north node, and the north node is exactly by degree conjunct Menelete to the minute. In fact, the north node is exactly conjunct Menelete's midhaven to the minute, 10 degrees
mm,
Capricorn 44. That north node and that midhaven, the highest point of the zodiac, the highest
mhm,
point of the zodiac astronomically for the observer. And that
mhm.
moon is right there too. A
Yeah.
big, beautiful, almost full moon. In
Mhm.
fact, that day, a big, beautiful full moon, lunar eclipse moon. And what's a reference point all of us in today, 2025, have to those who've got a moon, sun, who were born during a lunar eclipse? Donald Trump,
Yeah.
born during a lunar eclipse. And what
Mm.
does that lunar eclipse astronomically mean? It means that we have a full moon, the sun on one side of the sky, the moon opposite, and the earth in between. So the earth's shadow during a lunar eclipse occults or cloaks the moon. So the material earth cloaks the emotion, cloaks the feeling state. I mean, here you said he's a kid, Manolete, a Cancer, an emotional, family-oriented kid who's hiding behind mom's skirt tails, right? You said very feeling, very emotional, and yet he spends his career butchering animals live in front of an audience. I mean, that's pretty, I mean, one wouldn't expect that. But
Mm.
here he's born during a lunar eclipse, and his emotions are in some way sacrificed. Donald Trump, born during a lunar eclipse, the material planet Earth, the shadow of the Earth covers that lunar eclipse moon
Mhm.
symbolically. But I'm just throwing that out. I mean, astronomically, it's the case.
Well, I mean, the sun-moon combination is fascinating to study just on its own.
Yes.
In
Well,
some charts, the sun-moon blend can represent up to 70% of the personality.
wow.
Based on the work that I've done, it seems to hold true. It, in some cases, up to 70%. That doesn't mean everybody's like 60 to 70%, but in those instances where that sun moon, the core, that's why my nickname on Instagram is Astral Core, right? And that's that premise. Everything else is gingerbread. And we make too much of, where's your Venus? Where's your, I mean, it's important. It's not unimportant, but I think one of the things, especially in the conceptual framework that Hillman's talking about, this soul, this acorn, that it's almost beyond grasp. You were just kind of scratching at the shell of it with astrology in some respects. And if we have the humility to allow for that, I think that can enrich our astrology.
So
Uh,
I mean I would see and you're educating us, bringing Hillman's work and your study of Hillman's work to this chart. And so I'm going to ask you. It's kind of well, we're banter here, but to me that Moon Midhaven North Node conjunction, the Mercury Pluto South Node Sun conjunction, it's an undeniably powerful part of this guy's chart. His sun sign ruled by the moon. The moon, he's born just before a lunar eclipse, that day of a lunar eclipse. I don't know if it was even visible from Europe when he was born, but which would be another interesting phenomenon because the ancient astrologer would certainly have noticed such a thing. So
mm,
when you say some charts like 70% can be powerfully, that 70% of the person's character can be powerfully mirrored by a lunar cycle. We're all born during some phase of the moon, but you're saying that with this chart of all charts tells me this is a really powerful lunar chart.
yes, and I even with the nodes not there, this Cancer Sag combination is driven to be influential. But because of the observations that you added on, I think adds to the case. And because there is the Mars in Gemini, Quindachili, the moon, that's supercharging that moon with an obsessive compulsiveness, a really gives the timid, fearful boy some teeth, right? And that moon that needs to um, affect the way other people think and think about him is going to receive that fire on the mind is what I called it earlier.
And that moon in the outer that moon, that full moon, the full moon during it had an eclipse that night or the night after, but that full moon of his birth, or nearly full moon, is he was born at midnight, so the moon is overhead. It's
Yeah,
the moon is astronomically supercharged.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he was born on, furthermore, he was born with a moon and Mercury. I'm going back between charts that I can highlight. Moon and Mercury both are opposite to each other almost by degree. Each of those planets, the moon and Mercury, were out of bounds by declination. Both the moon and Mercury were out of bounds by declination. And out of bounds means that the moon was running particularly low to the horizon. So like a headlight coming at you, a full moon headlight low to the south, and that Mercury, when that Mercury would rise during the day, would be unusually high overhead. So
Mm,
the Mercury's out of bounds. His mercurial mind and his lunar nature, particularly here at Born at Night, is super spotlighted. Another layer, right, of that super spotlight.
mm.
And then you did make a reference. You made a reference to that Aries rising that he has.
Yes, and I'm glad you're bringing that up right now because where I wanted to go is read what Jose Flores Camara, his mentor, said about him, who, when he saw his potential where other coaches weren't that interested in Manolete, Camara saw something. And Hillman talks about um, the importance of all of us being seen. And it's the act of being seen by someone in a way that's affirming of who you are, affirming of the soul's potential that allows the acorn is what Hillman he keeps going back to that. I want him to just say soul. So it allows the soul to see for itself. And so he does really kind of do a great job poetically. But what he said, Kamara said, or uh, what Conrad, the author of the book, said was that Kamara saw Manolete had tremendous courage. Aries rising, Mars, Quindachili the moon in
And
Mars
can you
in.
can you? I'm sorry, I had to interrupt your flow, but quindachili, a 165 between the Mars and the Moon, and the meaning of you made reference to what the meaning of quindachili would be. Can you give me
So
some handles on that, some keywords?
the meaning of the Quindachili aspect
Yeah.
can be, as I said, obsessive compulsiveness. So that's the Quindachili. It also is an indicator of separation, strife, um, tenacity. I think that's redundant with obsessive compulsiveness, but it's powerful. It's a powerful, powerful aspect. Um, I think those are good keywords
So
to.
we're gonna instruct our listeners and viewers to start checking out their charts where planets are almost opposite to each other, but not quite, and see
Right.
if you've got that 165 between
Yeah.
the two planetary bodies, because that's even. Would you say it's more powerful than an opposition,
Yes.
or is it just
Yes.
you say it's more powerful than an opposition?
Yeah, I mean, you can get the opposition can be debilitating. It can also be quite helpful depending on the planets involved, because one of the key words for the opposition is awareness. Like you're seeing, like
Like a
the
full moon,
planets literally see each other,
like a full moon,
like the full
where you
moon.
see the whole disk of the moon, not
But
just
when you
portions.
go 15 degrees before or after that full awareness, there's not quite the change, and then it's the change is behind you. There's a tension before the awareness comes into view, and the anxiety about it coming or leaving. I think that also would then coincide with the behavioral things that we observe as astrologers or humanistic psychologists as obsessive compulsive behaviors um, that typically are tied to anxiety. So it's, I think, more intense
What?
than an opposition, and I think because of that, it's an important aspect.
Wow, you bring up I'm gonna request that you and I riff at least a show or two on so-called minor astrological minor aspects versus the Ptolemaic big five, conjunction, square, opposition, etc. Here, 165 would be considered a minor aspect. But
Right.
you're saying maybe you could hold a minor aspect to Astrology 101, but you're saying it's super powerful.
Super powerful, and semi squares can be extraordinarily powerful, especially in consideration of solar arcs. We've talked about the accumulated semi-arc square that happens for all of us at about age 48, 49. Very similar to the Saturn return. Like these are epic, you know, powerful times that can be shape-shifting for us in our behavioral experience. So just to finish off, we're at the Aries ascendant, tremendous courage. He saw, Kamara saw that Manolete had killed better than anyone he had ever seen. How's that for affirmation? He killed the bulls better than anyone he had ever seen. He killed in the old-fashioned, dangerous, stylish, straight over the right horn, up to the hilt school killing. So he was using a sword. They use they use the spears, and they get the spears stuck. And when the bull is sufficiently tired and you know vulnerable, it's not without risks, but when they see the opening for going for the kill after they've exhausted the bull to some extent, they'll go with a sword. But that had fallen out of favor. Manolete had brought it back, and he would use the sword to go in for the kill right over that right horn. And prior to that, that practice had all but disappeared. So Kamara saw this and said, "This this young boy, this young man, is will be a famous bullfighter." He saw it. He saw the acorn.
There's another, I have to kind of double check. Elnath, Elnath. Elnath is the fixed star. The from for the bull, as we are seeing the constellation. For the viewer, it's the left horn. For the bull itself, it would be the bull's right horn. And Elnath, the fixed star in Taurus and Auriga, uh, that Elnath visually is above Aldebaran, the red giant Aldebaran. The red giant Aldebaran has its placement at 8 degrees, 8, almost 9 degrees of Gemini. This is where, as a backyard astronomer, as an astronomer astrologer, I use white orbs. People will castigate me for using orbs more than 1 degree or 2 degrees. I go with what the ancients would have seen. When what I see at the eyepiece of my telescope or when I'm out there under the stars. So Manolete had Aldebaran, the fixed star Aldebaran, conjunct that Mars that you are saying is in quindicille to that very powerful moon in this chart.
Mm.
That conjunction of Aldebaran, eight, almost not really 9 degrees of Gemini, the eye of the bull, by the way. the red giant star, the Eye of the Bull, which is one of the four royal stars of Egypt. It is one of the four royal stars
Oh,
describing gifted.
right.
It's the military. It's a militaristic. It's a powerful. It's a leader star, amongst other things. That 9 degree, 8 degree.
Well, I love the way that you talk about orbs, and somebody wants to ask Noel Till, what's the widest orb you would allow for an
Between
aspect?
planets.
And he said he thought about it for a minute, and he said, well, 360 degrees if I need it. So, uh, you're in good company. Yeah. So, but your point is you have a visual um, cue, and that was very similar to Michael Erlewine, by the way, who was also an
I
astronomer.
think
You're
Erlewine's still
probably
with. Is Erlewine? He's still living, is he not?
yeah, he still is. I don't know how much astronomy he's doing, but uh, he's got some courses and books written on astronomy. But I think you're probably um, a few notches above in the ast ast astronomical
Well,
department.
thank you. Well, I know in our time, we're watching our time a little bit here for this long program today, but we're going to go to the slide about Menolete's death, and we may even touch base to show the charts to show B about the other matador, John Fulton, whose death date was today, our recording. But I did want to comment too, if I may, that I know of a MMA fighter, a champion MMA fighter who is a Cancer sun sign and an Aries rising, a zero Taurus, 29 Aries rising, and this other Cancer person, like Manolete, Aries rising, Cancer sun. Both of these people are champion fighters. They are
Mm.
Cancerians who are champion fighters. They're Cancerians who go in for the kill. Interesting. I would never have thought of Cancerians as being individuals who go in for the kill.
I
But
just want to share with you that something that's very powerful, and I apologize I had this cut off here. But in the aspect grid, one of the reasons I like it, you get a different view than having the middle of the chart. And I like that real estate open so I can write on the chart when I'm working with a client and I can make notes right in there. And so I keep that real estate useful for that purpose. And for the aspects, I prefer the aspect grid. And one of the things you get right off the bat is like, sometimes there's more than one quindicili. You've got quinti quintiles to the ascendant that are clearly marked his creativity. You can use the aspects to the midheaven for the vocational aspects. But the thing I wanted to point out is that there are no squares in his chart,
mm,
and the square with a chart without a square usually is someone who has a difficult time fighting for themselves. And here he becomes a bullfighter. And I just thought that one piece with the quindicili and the um, uh, peregrine planets, that's what these planets unaspected represent. So they're going to have a lot more say in the analytical process of this person's drive to be influential coming out into the world, coming out from under all that suppression, coming out from within their shell to meet the world is pretty powerful. And but it wouldn't be for long because that one day when he stepped into the arena, this is a chart of the natal horoscope wrapped first with the solar arcs measured on the date of his death, with the outer ring as the transits. And the first thing that I saw was that transiting Mars coming right to that point that was hit, in previous times in his life with the father's death, with meeting the mentor, and then meeting the horn of the bull.
Mm,
And interestingly, Jupiter opposing by solar arc precisely his natal moon, um, which is a powerful symbolism on its own. But when you're reading the news of how this person drew more fans and more than just fans, just he was a national hero, and he drew out everybody in the country. They were heartbroken and in shock that this person was taken from them. And you see Jupiter rules the ninth house, holding the moon. It disposits the moon, and this was a fond farewell to a hero. Like it's a magnificent, um, talk about coming into full awareness of your country and the world. That's to me what that um, uh, illuminated arrow represents.
that's awesome. That's a great, great, great review, particularly that uh, I say above the equator, astronomically, Leos and Cancers are the summertime babies. They are the babies where mom's womb is huge. The babies are about to arrive when children are home from school and people are on vacation. So those Cancer Leo babies are the quintessential family baby, and they are the heart of the family. And we know that he was born at midnight in the sort of in today's world, when you're a child born at midnight, the first thing mom and dad will do when they can get you out of the hospital, or, they'll take you home and they'll take you home to bed with them. You know, so that Cancer baby, a midnight baby, is the baby who is really in the womb of the family, the womb of the family. And you and I know that the fourth house of a chart, where Manolete has so much of all his planets bundled, deals with
Uh,
home, family, and community, and nation.
let me
Nation,
just
state, community.
let me just interject here. I should have spoke better to these points. I have a red circle around the sun, the IC at 1044 Cancer, and solar arc Mars and transiting Mars. It's not just transiting Mars that's coming across the IC, which I know you picked up on, Alexander, but for people who aren't seeing the chart, it's a three-ringed chart, and solar arc Mars has come uh, to the sun, and transiting Mars has come to the south node, and they're both the arc and transiting Mars, which makes its round every 2 years, little less, a little
Transiting
more,
Mars. Yeah.
um, and it's just interesting that this is a pivotal planet in Menolete's chart, given the quintichili to the moon. So he's predisposed, I suspect, to the Mars transits, and it would be interesting to kind of delineate that further,
And
which
Aries
I've not done.
Aries rising ruled by Mars.
Exactly, which is where I was going. And
Oh,
so the symbolism is profound in my humble opinion, that he made his way in the world with the sword and the spear as a warrior hero,
mm,
right in the arena. And that's also how he met his death.
I wanted to say that you, as you point out, and I have your chart, of course, here, that solar arc Mars has finally come from its natal position in Gemini to arc at age 30 to conjoin his sun, right? As you
Yes.
drawn here. And
Yes.
that will happen only once in his life.
Yes.
It is whenever a solar arc cycle happens to our birth chart, it will only happen once in your life. So the astrologer at his birth could say, my friend, at age 30, that Mars will come to your sun. And normally, my experience with clients is that's when a client will launch a new company, launch a new business, or when they will achieve at some point of achievement of one's skill set or talents.
Mm.
But for a person who lives by the sword, ironically, who died by the sword of the bull, the horn, that gored his leg, the transit of Mars is the every 2 year. Wherever Mars is in your chart, it'll always come back to its natal position every 2 years of our lives. Its orbit around the sun is 2 years. So just as you said, it's really profound that solar arc Mars, a once in a lifetime gig that happened that year before and the year of his death, had transiting Mars almost to the day on top of it. Very, very,
Yeah.
very powerful. Now, I was also wondering, I presumed you might be looking at other things as I was about the solar arcs, and what might have indicated this, what might have said this is a death. A client might ask, or the listener or viewer might ask, would we have known that, Mars is accidents, Mars is cutting, Mars is surgery, but Mars could also have been him, with Jupiter, like having the grandest of grand slayings in the ring. It could have been the most glorious or the most,
It could be, but remember we looked at Saturn arcing to Neptune, and he almost died of pneumonia.
right?
And we were making the point of critical illness, um, and Neptune so very often can really point to a disorientation in the individual, especially when it's under pressure. In the 12th house, this may have been a weak spot for Manolete in terms of his consciousness. Um, and on this particular day, some kind of supernatural experience, which apparently he had some inkling that this was not his day to, be bullfighting, but yet he felt the responsibility and he went and did it anyway. Pluto arced to conjoin Neptune. You can see it's, bellying up to Neptune in the manner that Saturn did when he had pneumonia as a child at 2.
Wow,
And
right.
now at 30, we have Pluto bellying up to that critical um, illness or area. And he received the impalement, which didn't kill him. He died a day later from the complications of the impalement.
So, so you had pointed out earlier that, and I'm circling it for the audience here, that Neptune, Pisces is in the 12th house cusp of his natal chart.
Yeah,
Neptune, therefore, governs that 12th house of his natal chart. The
thank
solar
you.
arc Pluto had arced from its birth placement to that Neptune. That Neptune, which itself at age 2 had that Saturn arc to it. So, so he has that Pluto now repeating a cycle he had when he was 2 years old of Saturn
Mm,
to Neptune. Now it's Pluto to Neptune. Pluto,
right.
to any astrologer these days in the 21st and 20th century, Pluto rules death and dying and rebirth. So Pluto to Neptune, Pluto to Saturn. Pluto's within orb of Saturn as well. That's the
Yes.
killer. You see,
Yes,
literally,
yes.
that's the killer. If you see a client's chart and solar arc Pluto comes to your Saturn or your Neptune or your Sun, those are times, those are years that can be deathly, or either the beginning of an illness or beginning of a chronic condition, or it can be the chronic condition that takes your life. And this is a really powerful theme, particularly because I think about astrologer Michael Luton, decades and decades ago, pointed out in one lecture I attended, and even our kibitzing, he and I, after, that in this case, the ruler of Manolete's eighth house of death, Pluto,
Yeah,
came to the ruler of Manolete's 12th house of long suffering issues,
exactly.
or of illness. So it begs the question, doesn't it? Is the eighth house the real ruler of the house of death, or is the 12th the house of death? Or is it, for that matter, is the sixth the house of death? I mean, we're taught the eighth house is the house of death. But a lot of us will see those water houses, the fourth house, the eighth house, the 12th house, being involved with illness and death, very common, not just the eighth. So
Exactly.
the ruler of the eighth, Pluto, conjoin Neptune is a key thing. The ruler of the ascendant, Mars, by solar arc on his sun, transiting Mars to that triggering the solar, or transiting Mars, triggering the solar arc Mars. This is what makes this a deathly, death-defying time period. And even within a few days, that transit of Mars, it's right on his nadir at 10 degrees. The transit of Mars is right on his sun, off by like a day, transiting Mars to his natal sun that has solar arc Mars on it. So this is a supercharged time of potential jeopardy. And then of course too, lastly, the solar arc Neptune at 9 degrees is off by 1 degree from the nodes, and really by reflex
That's
action of
transit.
the sun. I'm sorry, transiting. Forgive me.
Yeah.
The transit. Thank you.
But still,
Got to keep our P's and Q's straight here. Transiting Neptune at 9 degrees of Libra was square his natal sun and natal nodal axis. That transiting Neptune at 9 degrees of Libra, by the way, I checked it out. The asteroid Toro is around 4 degrees or 5 degrees. The Neptune was sitting on his natal asteroid Toro, Bull, by the way, in Manolete's natal chart. That's another little, for those of you who like to dig into asteroids, I do. That's interesting. Neptune is sitting on, Toro, the bull, and that bull strength usually, and asteroids
now
tend.
we got to see if Michael Jordan has that.
We'll have to look.
It is interesting you brought it up. The water signs on the fourth, eighth, and 12th house um, do seem to correspond to a kind of matrix of the unconscious. And it's fascinating to think that Manolete had this premonition that this was not his day in the arena, and but went bravely because he was courageous. He went like an Aries ascendant to meet his death, essentially, you know, and dying a hero's death in like we might not appreciate it as much as a dunk on the basketball court, but because we don't understand the art and the sport of bullfighting, it's not our culture. But if we could step outside of ourselves a little bit, and we some of us have seen the bull run, and Spain is crazy about this sport still today, but it was even more so back in Menolete's time and Fulton's time, as we'll see, who's one of the few outsiders from Spain, happened to be an American born in Philadelphia to go make and break through in the sport of bullfighting, which is a whole separate story that I hope to kind of, because it's fun, it's different.
We might
People are
need to make it.
fatigued from the political banter and
We gotta
political.
we gotta make it part two of this
I
saga,
think,
because we got a
I
long
think
show
so.
right now. So, last thing I wanted to say, if I may, just jump in here a little because of the time too, is that transiting Jupiter was opposing natal Jupiter Mars, and I would have thought that when he was gored by the bull, even though the Mars solar arc was on his sun, transiting Mars is by all means supercharging that solar arc, that once in a lifetime solar arc Mars to his sun. I'm using my arrow to show folks on your chart here. Well, that is, accident, explosion, cutting, surgery, something that's martial. And as you said, the solar arc Pluto on his Neptune, those are super dangerous aspects. But the average astrologer would, myself included too, look at that transit of Jupiter and think, gee, Jupiter, the preserver, the one that can preserve life, opposite natal Jupiter. Wouldn't you hope that maybe with surgery and Mars that he could have been rescued? What took Manolete's life a day after the goring when that transiting moon was opposite his Saturn Neptune at one
I
degree?
have to check the notes, but I
Well,
believe it was bacteria.
it could have been, well, Neptune square his sun. Neptune rules bacteria. Pluto rules viruses, by the way. Neptune generally governs, although they two sometimes swap in the meaning, right, in medical astrology. But Neptune rules bacteria, and Neptune is in his sixth house of wellness and health and treatment, and squaring that transiting Mars, and squaring that solar arc Mars, and squaring that natal sun nodes. And the other thing that they said when I read the bio was they think that they gave him the wrong blood. There was something about bad blood or and
Oh,
blood and hemoglobin is ruled by Mars, by the way. So Neptune squaring the transitive Mars and solar arc Mars and the sun, that they gave him bad blood. That's what
oh,
I read was bad blood. Or they wonder, they speculate. It could have been bacteria born in blood. I don't know, but so the Neptune, by the way,
hmm.
when you have Neptune in a like no astrologer would elect a chart, right, for a medical procedure during Neptune if they could help it.
Right,
And
right.
you sure as hell wouldn't elect solar arc Mars to your sun with transiting Mars on top of it and Neptune square the whole time. That would be the last thing you would not choose that time for a surgery because of some Neptunian confusion or unclarity that can happen, or Neptune can be poisoning or toxins. So so the chart brings up the matter of death was not just that he was gored. It was actually, he could have probably, I mean, American well, hospital, he probably would have survived just fine with
Right,
that, his leg gored. But
right.
the issue was the Neptune. Somebody, gave him the wrong blood or the wrong blood type or something went wrong with the blood, is what they
Yeah,
do report.
yeah.
So any closing responses to that, thoughts for our
I
night
mean,
tonight, summarizations?
I think those are great observations, and if it were today, he would have survived. I mean, they would have had they would have had care at the arena that was probably as good or better than what he ended up getting in the
And
hospital,
and the transit of Jupiter
in the
opposing his
time.
transit of Jupiter opposing his Jupiter.
Yeah,
That would have potentially transit of Jupiter, Jupiter 20 degrees of Scorpio transiting on his eighth house cusp of death,
right.
opposing his Jupiter.
But I
Oh,
mean, I guess my closing remark is for me, the challenge is like, it is what happened. And so,
well,
in a sense,
and by the way,
we're
continue further.
talking about Menolite, Menolete today when Uranus is inching ever so closer to his natal Jupiter, where I am curious to see and watch if this story doesn't somehow reemerge into the zeitgeist of Netflix or something, because what a story it is. And this is something we talked prior to going on air, how the Salvador Munday work that was discovered that Leonardo da Vinci put out there, his chart was lit up at the time with solar arcs and progressions and transits
Hmm.
in ways that echoed previous um, big time events in Leonardo's life, which I hope we get to delve into. I think the big takeaway for me in this discussion, and I hope that listeners will take away with them is that the chart echoes. It echoes and reverberates out. You have the sun and the moon that have a particular core and a particular core concern that needs to be heard in the universe. And so what's organized and arranged around that core are other planets that have certain aspects that will reverberate that central message in a sense. And then you can see with the arcs and with the transits as they come around again and again and again, these sensitive points, we all have sensitive points in our charts. This is a particularly fine exhibit of that. Where there's just a few points here that get resounding rings over and over, big bells, we call them. And when the big bell rings, it's really kind of difficult not to hear that. So sometimes we need to simplify things because we can get a little too complicated in our approach. And I think for listeners, what they might be able to do is zoom in on a couple of points, find a couple of points, couple of sensitive points, see how they reverberate with the core message that the chart is trying to say. You wouldn't think that the little boy hiding behind his mother's apron skirt
A
was the
Cancerian.
person who's going to come out and be a national hero. But that's what happened. And he met his fate. He met his death, the appropriate death for the bullfighter who became a national hero and world renowned is what that solar arc Jupiter to the moon in the ninth house in Sagittarius seems to
his
be
his,
saying.
his legacy, the legacy of the history and the legacy of his being a national hero. I'd love to continue this if we can another program because we have, as you say, John Fulton to discuss, a bullfighter who was an American bullfighter in Spain. He's also super famous. We have a death chart for him as well. But I did want to just put it out there if you can please return and take us through that as well. It again is terribly interesting, after all. And if you do me a favor, could you kill your share screen so we can see your face? And then I want to bring up your contact data again as I had before, so people can see you and contact you
Toro.
as they wish. But I do think I'll try to reduce this guy. Sorry, and get his data there for you. Um, I do think it's terribly interesting because when it comes to the experience of family and family lineage, the theme for family lineage is that our lives, our birth and our passing are two critical times about our family meaning and how we make sense of our journey through the life, in the life of our family, the life of our town, the life of our community, the life of our state, the life of our nation. It's all Cancerian themes, and
Mm.
as you say, Manolete and his chart are personal, family related, and national family. George W. was a Cancerian. When we went to war to get Saddam Hussein, George W. Cancer son, George W. President W. said, but Saddam tried to kill my daddy. You understand what it's like to have someone try to kill your father. It's a personal, emotional Cancerian theme. So I just want to say to contact Timothy, please visit his website, www.hudsonvalleyastrologer.com, as in the Hudson Valley, New York. hudsonvalleyastrologer.com is Tim's wonderful website. Lots of your writings, lots of great publishings and things you have for us to see there. So Tim, you're a wonderful speaker, wonderful teacher. Thank you for this really interesting
Hey,
exercise.
just to outtake, I know we're in overage time now. Uh, Last year I offered up a kind of ritual for my sister. The cold plunge was all the rage, and I'm like, I'm not gonna go get a $4,000 bucket that I can plug in just so it can be 20 degrees constantly. But I learned you could do a version of the cold plunge just by taking a cold shower. So I took a cold shower every day last year, and I didn't miss one day. And my showers got remarkably short as a result.
Uh,
But this
well,
year, I'm not doing that anymore. I did that one year. And so this year, I chose to do something new. And every day I'm answering a prompt on the blog. So I don't really know what I'm going to write about. It's just I see the prompt, I answer the prompt. And so it's just really spontaneous kind of, you're going to be as surprised as I'm going to be when you get there and you
well,
see what I wrote.
that's awesome. So again, folks, for Timothy's website, www hudsonvalleyastrologer.com. Please go and check it out. Tim, you're wonderful. Let's do this again and get to John Fulton's Bullfighter John Fulton's chart. These two principles, the principle of life and aliveness and death, both these bullfighters,
Hmm.
uh, Manolete and John Fulton were also heroic showmen. They, as you say, they loved the audience. The audience was the family, the home, the community. As you say, in Spain, bullfighting is it's a national religion, and so
Yeah,
these men tapped
well put.
into that pulse of life. And interestingly, both of them were artists. John Fulton, we'll see next time. Literally a great artist. We'll talk about his art.
Literally.
Maybe we'll show a few of his slides next time. All right. Thank you so much, Tim. Great to see you.
Great
We'll
to see you.
see you again
Have a good
soon.
night.
Have a good night. Take care.
Ciao.
Blessings.